What Israel and Iran just did matches Ezekiel's final warning. Something happened between Israel and Iran that has prophecy watchers around the world saying the same thing. This looks like Ezekiel, but is that true? Are we actually watching the fulfillment of one of the Bible's most dramatic prophecies? So let me show you what happened. And let me show you why it matters. Number 1. What Israel just did. The trigger moment. To understand where we are, you need to understand what just happened. In June 2025, Israel and Iran fought what analysts are now calling the 12-day war. It wasn't a ground invasion. It wasn't a prolonged campaign. It was intense, targeted, and unlike anything we'd seen before. The Iron Dome worked overtime, casualties mounted on both sides. And then, after 12 days, a fragile ceasefire took hold. But the ceasefire didn't bring peace. It brought preparation. And if that sounds familiar, if that sounds like something you've read before, it should. Because Ezekiel named something similar 2,600 years ago. Let me take you to the text, because what Ezekiel wrote is remarkable, and remarkably specific. Ezekiel 38, 1-6, KJV. And the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. And I will turn thee back, and put hooks into thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth, and all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords, Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet, Gomer and all his bands, the house of Togarmah of the north quarters, and all his bands, and many people with thee. Now let me break this down nation by nation, because every name Ezekiel listed can be traced through ancient historical records, through genealogies, through geography, to specific regions that exist today. This isn't speculation, and when you see where these ancient names point on a modern map, you'll understand why prophecy watchers are paying such close attention. Gog and Magog, the leader and his land. Ezekiel describes an invasion led by a figure called Gog from a land called Magog. Who is Gog? The name appears to be a title, like Pharaoh for Egyptian kings or Caesar for Roman emperors. Gog is the leader. Magog is his land. And where is Magog? The ancient Jewish historian Josephus, writing in the 1st century AD, identified Magog with the Scythians, a fierce warrior people who lived in the regions north of the Black Sea and the Caucasus Mountains. That's modern-day Russia and the former Soviet republics. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus described the Scythians as dwelling in the lands we now call Ukraine, southern Russia, and Central Asia. The 1st century Roman geographer Pliny located Magog in the same northern regions, and the Table of Nations in Genesis 10 lists Magog as a son of Japheth, whose descendants populated the regions north and west of the Middle East. Genesis 10:2 KJV. The sons of Japheth, Gomer, and Magog, and Madai, and Javan, and Tubal, and Meshech, and Tiras. Notice something interesting. Gomer, Magog, Tubal, and Meshech are all listed as sons of Japheth. They're all mentioned in Ezekiel's coalition. They all settled in the northern regions, what we now call Russia, Turkey, and the Caucasus. Ezekiel also calls Gog the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. Now, some translations render chief prince as prince of Rosh, because the Hebrew word Rosh can mean chief or head, but it can also be a proper noun referring to a people or place. Many scholars, including the renowned Hebrew linguist Wilhelm Gesenius, argued that Rosh refers to the people who gave their name to Russia. The Byzantine Greeks called the Vikings who settled in Kiev Rus or Rus, the root of the word Russia. Is this definitive? Scholars debate it. But what's undeniable is this. Ezekiel describes a power from the extreme north, leading this invasion. Ezekiel 38:15, KJV. And thou shalt come from thy place out of the north parts, thou and many people with thee, all of them riding upon horses, a great company, and a mighty army. From the north parts. If you draw a line directly north from Israel, you pass through Lebanon, through Syria, through Turkey, and eventually you reach Russia. Russia is the nation directly north of Israel. Russia is the great military power of the northern regions. Russia fits the description of Magog better than any other nation on earth. Persia, the unmistakable identification. Now let's look at the first ally Ezekiel names. Persia. This is the easiest identification in the entire prophecy. There's no debate, no ambiguity, no scholarly disagreement. Persia is Iran. The Persian Empire was founded by Cyrus the Great in 550 BC, just decades after Ezekiel wrote this prophecy. It became one of the largest empires in human history, stretching from India to Egypt. The Persians ruled for centuries until Alexander the Great conquered them in 330 BC. But the people remained. The culture remained. The identity remained. For 2,500 years, the nation we call Iran was known to the world as Persia. It wasn't until 1935 that the country officially changed its name from Persia to Iran. But even today, the Iranian people call themselves Persians. They speak Persian. They identify with Persian history, Persian poetry, Persian culture. When Ezekiel wrote Persia in 593 BC, he was pointing directly at the nation we now call Iran. And here's what's remarkable. In Ezekiel's day, Persia and Israel were not enemies. In fact, it was a Persian king, Cyrus, who freed the Jews from Babylonian captivity and allowed them to return to Jerusalem. Isaiah 44:28, KJV. That saith of Cyrus, He is my shepherd, and shall perform all my pleasure, even saying to Jerusalem, Thou shalt be built, and to the temple, Thy foundation shall be laid. Persia was Israel's liberator. Persia was Israel's friend. So when Ezekiel prophesied that Persia would one day join a coalition to invade Israel, that would have seemed impossible to his original audience. Why would Persia attack the nation it had saved? But look at Iran today. The friend became the enemy, exactly as Ezekiel prophesied. Cush, the lands south of Egypt. The next nation Ezekiel lists is translated Ethiopia in the King James Version, but the Hebrew word is Cush. And Cush doesn't perfectly match modern Ethiopia. In ancient geography, Cush referred to the lands immediately south of Egypt, the region along the Upper Nile. This includes modern Sudan, parts of Ethiopia, Eritrea, and possibly Somalia. The Table of Nations in Genesis 10 identifies Cush as a son of Ham. whose descendants populated Africa. And the sons of Ham, Cush, and Mizraim, and Phut, and Canaan. Cush settled south of Egypt. Mizraim is Egypt. Phut, Put, settled west of Egypt. So when Ezekiel says Cush, he's pointing to the nations of northeastern Africa, particularly Sudan. The point is clear. The region Ezekiel called Cush is exactly the kind of nation that could join a Russian-led, Iranian-allied coalition against Israel. P-U-T, the lands west of Egypt. The next nation is translated Libya in many versions. The Hebrew word is Put or Phut. Like Cush, Put was a son of Ham, whose descendants settled in Africa. Ancient sources consistently identify Put with the regions west of Egypt, what we now call Libya, and possibly parts of Tunisia and Algeria. The Greek historian Herodotus mentioned the Puteans as a people living in North Africa. Gomer, the ancient ancestor of Turkey. Now we move to a different branch of Noah's family. Gomer was a son of Japheth, the same lineage as Magog. Genesis 10:2-3, KJV. The sons of Japheth, Gomer and Magog. And the sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz and Riphath and Togarmah. Notice, Togarmah is Gomer's son. They're mentioned together in Ezekiel's prophecy because they settled in the same general region. Ancient sources identify Gomer with the Cimmerians, a people who lived north of the Black Sea and later migrated into Asia Minor, modern Turkey. The ancient Assyrians called them Gimiri. The Greeks called them Kimmeroi, Cimmerians. They eventually settled in the regions of Anatolia, central and eastern Turkey. The Jewish Talmud identifies Gomer with Germania, but most modern scholars believe this refers to the Germanic tribes that passed through the Cimmerian territories, not the final settlement of Gomer's descendants. The weight of evidence points to Turkey. And Turkey's position today? Turkey is a NATO member, theoretically a Western ally. But under President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, Turkey has drifted dramatically. Turkey has clashed with Israel repeatedly over Gaza and Palestinian issues. Turkish-Israeli relations have collapsed to their lowest point in decades. Turkey is a Muslim-majority nation with an increasingly Islamist government, and it sits directly north of Israel, exactly where Ezekiel said the invasion would originate. Togarmah, of the North Quarters. The final nation Ezekiel names is the House of Togarmah of the North Quarters. Togarmah was a son of Gomer, so they're closely related peoples. Ancient sources identify Togarmah with Armenia and the regions of eastern Turkey near the Caucasus Mountains. The ancient Armenians actually claim descent from Togarmah, calling their ancestor Torgom. The phrase of the North Quarters confirms the northern location. These are peoples from the far north of Israel's perspective. Today, this region includes eastern Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, all situated in the strategic Caucasus region between Russia and the Middle East. Armenia has strong ties to Russia. Azerbaijan has ties to Turkey and Iran. The entire region is within Russia's sphere of influence. The coalition on a modern map. Now step back and look at the complete picture. Ezekiel named Magog, Russia, Persia, Iran, Cush, Sudan, and northeastern Africa. Put, Libya, and North Africa. Gomer, Turkey. Togarmah, eastern Turkey, Armenia, the Caucasus. Draw this on a map. Russia in the far north. Turkey directly north of Israel, Iran to the east, Libya to the west, Sudan to the south, Israel surrounded on every side except the Mediterranean Sea. And every single one of these nations either has hostile relations with Israel today or is drifting in that direction. This is not coincidence. This is convergence, the geopolitical reality of 2025. Now look at the geopolitical alignments forming right now. 2,600 years ago, Ezekiel named nations that would align against Israel in the last days. Today, those exact nations are aligning. The Russia-Iran-Turkey axis is real. The North African instability is real. The hostility toward Israel is real. The prophetic coalition is assembling before our eyes. But Ezekiel didn't just predict who would attack Israel. He predicted when. Number 3. Israel will live in peace and safety. Has this condition been met? Here's where we need to be careful. Because Ezekiel didn't just name the nations that would attack Israel, he gave specific conditions for when this invasion would occur. And those conditions matter enormously. If we ignore them, we risk crying wolf, claiming fulfillment when the prophecy hasn't actually been fulfilled. If we understand them, we can watch with wisdom, recognizing what's happening without overreaching. So let me show you exactly what Ezekiel said. Ezekiel 38:8, KJV. After many days thou shalt be visited. In the latter years thou shalt come into the land that is brought back from the sword, and is gathered out of many people against the mountains of Israel, which have been always waste. But it is brought forth out of the nations, and they shall dwell safely, all of them. Notice several things in this verse. First, in the latter years. This is an end times prophecy. It happens in the final period of human history. Not in Ezekiel's day, not in the ancient past, but in the prophetic future. Second, the land that is brought back from the sword. Israel must be restored after experiencing devastation. The nation must have gone through judgment and returned. This points to the modern rebirth of Israel after 2,000 years of exile. A nation brought back from the sword of Roman destruction and centuries of persecution. Third, gathered out of many people. The Jewish people must have returned from worldwide dispersion. This is exactly what happened in the 20th century. Jews returning from Europe, Russia, the Middle East, Africa, the Americas, everywhere. Fourth, the mountains of Israel, which have been always waste. The land must have been desolate and then restored. Mark Twain visited Palestine in 1867 and described it as a desolate country, a silent, mournful expanse. But today, Israel is a flourishing nation with forests, farms, cities, and technology. The waste places have been rebuilt. Fifth, and most critically, they shall dwell safely, all of them. Israel must be dwelling in safety when this invasion occurs. Now look at verse 11, where Ezekiel elaborates on this condition. Ezekiel 38:11, KJV. And thou shalt say, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls, and having neither bars nor gates. Let me break down every phrase. The land of unwalled villages. In the ancient world, walls meant everything. Cities without walls were defenseless. Villages without walls were vulnerable. When an enemy approached, you fled to a walled city, or you died. For Ezekiel to describe Israel as having unwalled villages meant a condition of total security. so safe that walls weren't needed. No external threat, no fear of invasion, no need for fortifications. Them that are at rest. The Hebrew word here is shakat. It means to be quiet, undisturbed, at peace. No conflict, no war, no constant military operations, a nation at rest. That dwell safely. The Hebrew word is betach. It means securely, confidently, without fear. Not just physical safety, but psychological security. A sense of confidence that no enemy threatens. Dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates. No defensive barriers, no security checkpoints, no fortified borders, open, unprotected, confident. Now let me ask you a question. Does that describe Israel in 2025? Does Israel dwell in unwalled villages? Israel has the most sophisticated border security in the world. The Gaza barrier, a massive concrete wall with sensors, cameras, and military patrols, was penetrated on October 7, 2023, and Israel has since fortified it even further. Israel is not unwalled. Israel is one of the most fortified nations on earth. Is Israel at rest? Israel just fought the 12-day war with Iran in June 2025. Israeli forces conduct regular raids in the West Bank. The IDF is on constant high alert. Reserve soldiers are regularly called up for duty. Israel is not at rest. Israel is in one of the most intense security environments in its modern history. Does Israel dwell safely? Every Israeli home built since 1992 is required to have a bomb shelter. Israeli children practice rocket drills in school. The Iron Dome intercepts missiles on a regular basis. Israeli citizens check their phones constantly for red alert warnings. The government openly prepares for the next round of conflict. Israelis do not feel safe. They feel threatened. They feel surrounded. They feel that the next war could come at any moment. Does Israel have neither bars nor gates? Israel has checkpoints throughout the country. Security screenings at every mall, every bus station, every public venue. Armed guards at restaurants and schools, metal detectors at synagogues. Israel has more bars and gates than almost any nation on earth. The honest assessment. So here's the truth. The peace and safety condition of Ezekiel 38:11 has not been met. Israel is not dwelling securely. Israel is not at rest. Israel is not living in unwalled villages without bars or gates. Therefore, the Gog-Magog invasion described in Ezekiel 38-39 is not currently being fulfilled. What we're seeing today, the Iran conflict, the proxy attacks, the coalition forming, is not the war Ezekiel predicted. Not yet. Let me say that clearly, because some prophecy teachers get this wrong. This is not Ezekiel 38 being fulfilled. The conditions haven't been met. The full coalition hasn't assembled for a ground invasion. The supernatural divine intervention hasn't occurred. The 7-year aftermath hasn't begun. The prophecy is not being fulfilled right now. Why this condition matters so much. Now, some people dismiss this condition. They say, it's just poetic language. They say, Ezekiel didn't mean literal walls. They say, Israel feels safe enough, close enough. But I want to push back on that, because God is precise in his prophecies. When God said the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem, he meant Bethlehem, not Jerusalem, not Nazareth. When God said Jesus would ride into Jerusalem on a donkey, he meant a donkey, not a horse. When God said the Messiah would be pierced, he meant pierced, not stoned, not beheaded. Prophetic details matter. And when Ezekiel specifically describes Israel as living in unwalled villages, at rest, dwelling safely with neither bars nor gates, those details matter. God doesn't waste words. If he wanted to say, Israel will be attacked while still under threat, he could have said that, but he didn't. He said, at rest. He said, dwelling safely. He said, unwalled. And until those conditions are met, the invasion he describes cannot occur. This is actually a safeguard for proper prophetic interpretation. It prevents us from seeing Ezekiel 38 in every conflict. It keeps us from crying wolf every time tensions rise. It teaches us to watch carefully, to compare Scripture with current events, and to recognize the difference between stage setting and fulfillment. Serious Bible scholars across denominational lines have wrestled with this peace and safety condition. They argue that Israel's peace might come from a covenant with the Antichrist, who guarantees their security. Daniel 9:27, KJV. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. This 7-year covenant could create the conditions Ezekiel describes, a false peace that makes Israel lower its defenses. Safer than previous decades, even if not perfectly peaceful. But even these scholars acknowledge that Israel in 2025 does not fit Ezekiel's description of a nation at rest. The point is this: across different prophetic frameworks, there's widespread agreement that the current conflict is not the fulfillment of Ezekiel 38. The conditions simply aren't met. The deceptive nature of the coming peace. Here's something crucial to understand about this prophetic peace. It will likely be deceptive, false, temporary. Look at what Paul wrote to the Thessalonians. 1 Thessalonians 5:3 KJV. For when they shall say, peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them, as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. When they shall say, peace and safety. Not when there is peace and safety, but when people say there is peace and safety. This suggests a false confidence, a misplaced trust, a sense of security that isn't warranted. The world will be proclaiming peace, signing agreements, celebrating diplomacy, lowering defenses. And then, sudden destruction, like labor pains hitting a pregnant woman. Unexpected, overwhelming, inescapable. This is the pattern Scripture describes for the end times. Not gradual decline into war, but false peace followed by sudden catastrophe. And Ezekiel's invasion fits this pattern perfectly. Israel dwelling securely, at rest, without walls. Then suddenly, Gog and his allies sweep down from the north. The peace is shattered. The invasion begins. And God's judgment falls. What could trigger the peace? Now here's where it gets interesting. Because even though the condition isn't met today, we can see scenarios where it could be met, perhaps sooner than we think. Scenario 1. A major peace agreement. What if Saudi Arabia normalized relations with Israel, bringing the weight of the Islamic world's most influential nation into partnership with the Jewish state? What if the Palestinian issue was resolved, or at least managed, through international guarantees and territorial arrangements? Scenario 2. Military victory. What if Israel achieved decisive military victories that eliminated its primary threats? Israel might enter a period of unprecedented security, not through agreements, but through the elimination of threats. The walls might remain physically, but the psychological need for them would diminish. Israel would dwell safely, not because enemies promised peace, but because enemies were defeated.
Many seem to be confused because they do not understand the book of Revelation. However, what if there was an animation showing the entire book? Well, we created that. And to watch that, click here.